Another video that I was planning to make for a while. I've been very busy lately, so all I've posted is kitten videos essentially for about 2 weeks now. There's another topic that I wanted to talk about that it's of interest to me, it's of interest to many people. I think a lot of the people who are interested in the subject don't like to talk about it. Not just in real life, but online, because it gets them labeled a kook. It gets them labeled somebody who doesn't have their head screwed on, tight enough. They go around wearing a tinfoil hat, and that's the topic of aliens, extraterrestrials, UFOs, things of that nature. Basically, the extraterrestrial version of paranormal research, which isn't really paranormal at all if you assume that there are actually biological organisms elsewhere in the universe, maybe in our solar system, maybe in our galaxy, maybe nothing in the galaxy and outside of it. And you just assume that they're essentially physical creatures, they're different species of races or species of biological organisms. Then it's simply science that hasn't yet been quantified, of course, and of course there's a great deal of disinformation that goes on in the field, with people assuming that any presumed signal from outer space, anyone who is crazy, many of these people are crazy, who sets up some sort of hoax, saying, oh, I shot an alien in my cornfield, well, here's a grainy photo of the body, or here's, a terrible resolution image that I took with a 1990s era cell phone, retrofitted with a webcam of a UFO that I saw. And I always do chuckle, most UFO images seem to be extremely low resolution for some bizarre reason. Not exactly sure why. I believe that there's life out there. I base that, but I don't base that on, well, I just feel it, or aliens are talking to me through my tinfoil hat. I base that on simple observation. You have billions of stars out there. You have presumably billions, maybe tens of billions, maybe more planets in the universe. You have many millions of them right here in this one galaxy. It's full of stars. To assume that the Earth is so outrageously special that it happens to be the only location in the entire universe that spawns some sort of life makes absolutely no sense. And it's partially based on the limits of science. If you look at the limits of science, until fairly recently, the scientific equipment we were using was a lot, not worse, but less developed than the equipment that we use now. It was less developed. You couldn't see smaller planets. You could only see the large planets, the large suns. You go back far enough, you could only see things within our solar system, or nearby in the galaxy. There was no way that you could see outside of the galaxy. Now we can see much further, much more clearly, much smaller objects in much more detail than we could before. We have all sorts of equipment now that stuff from the 1970s or the 1980s is utterly obsolete. The telescopes are better, the imaging equipment is better. Hell, SETI has a program now where they have pictorial readouts of the data from their satellite arrays, from the dishes out in the desert there, where you can actually sign up and you can look through that data and you can help delineate, signals that are of interest. So it's come a long way. The internet has helped, obviously, some with that. They've got some sort of thing where you can hook using their screensaver, you can hook your computer to part of basically a botnet, essentially, to help their processing power. But things have gotten a lot more advanced. We can see a lot more. For instance, we now know, and we speculated but didn't know before, there is water on the moon as ice. Possibly liquid water, we're not sure. There is ice on Mars, probably underground water on Mars. This should give us pause. Until fairly recently, we assumed this was the only planet in the solar system with any form of water, ice or otherwise. It's speculated that Io is basically a water world covered in a thick sheet of ice. If water is so much more plentiful, and also we know now, because we have new imaging equipment, Until recently, it was speculated that planets the size of Earth were relatively rare. That's because the imaging equipment we were using wasn't capable of seeing very many of the planets of our size. Only on nearby stars could we actually see something of that size. Now we can see a lot further. We've realized, I think it was something like 40% of all the planets now that they've observed around other stars are roughly the size of Earth. Almost half of them. If you look at a bell curve of probability, most of the results are lumped in the middle. We have to assume, mathematically speaking, it's a pretty good chance that our solar system, that our galaxy, even our planet is fairly normal. That is to say, there's nothing really that special about our planet. As opposed to the religiocentric ideals of the past, of course, God created Earth, Earth is special, everything else revolves around Earth, it's the center of the universe, the center of existence. No, you can't fly through the air because you'll die. You can't go into outer space because God will shoot you with, magical powers. We know that's not true anymore. We've put objects into orbit. We've sent some people say no, but we've sent people to the moon. I don't believe the moon landing was a hoax. That would be quite an epic hoax to pull off. I think that's a conspiracy gone awry. But anyway, we've been up in outer space. We've tested the moon. We've sent probes to Mars, sent rovers and so forth. We've sent probes and satellites into outer space. Some of them are leaving the solar system now because they've been up long enough to do that. We now know that our solar system is not particularly interesting. Other than the fact that there's life on Earth and we haven't yet found life on another planet, everything else about our planet's fairly normal. The hallmarks of life for another planet would essentially be it has a moon, because that heats up the magma inside. It helps keep the center liquid, which of course allows various chemical processes to continue. It can't be too close to a sun or else it'd be completely baked. It can't be too far away or it'd be frozen over constantly. So basically we're looking for we don't even know if a planet has to be the size of Earth. A planet 10 times our size could just as easily sustain microbial life. It wouldn't really be that difficult. A planet smaller than ours, possibly too. All it needs to do is have an atmosphere, be not absolutely gigantic, be not too far or close to the sun, and most of them seem to have water. All the places that we've tested with probes seem to have some level of water on them. And it's really not that difficult to find water when hydrogen and oxygen are fairly common in the universe anyway. So if you've got a moon and you've got, lightning and other processes that develop on a planet that has a moon potentially, then you probably do have some sort of life on it. I would say, I believe there's microbial life elsewhere in this solar system. I think Io could have it, the moon could have it, Mars could have it. We haven't found evidence of it yet, although we did find simple organic molecules on Mars. That was another big breakthrough. Now that we're capable of testing for it, we found that Mars, it had running water at one time. I'm not talking about, glaciers or, stagnant pools. It had running water on it. We found evidence and or proof of that. Running water is a good place for life to begin. If it's hydrothermally active in any way, that has been speculated to be a possible source of life. We've found possible organic molecules. The universe is probably teeming with life. In order to, I think the thing boils down to this. The argument against life elsewhere in the universe is precipitated by this way of thinking. That we are special. That either through the hands of some creator or through some sort of spectacular, unlikely process, we are special. I think people thrive on that belief, that there's something very special about human life. I would say intelligent life in the universe is probably fairly uncommon. Because planets tend to get hit by asteroids, or have some other terrible process that knocks everything back down to simple microbes, and it takes 100 million years for it to evolve back into something with a neuron in its head. But I think there's microbial life in many locations, probably in this solar system. I'm sure it exists elsewhere in the galaxy. I'm basically positive about that. It's just pure chance and odds. It would be the odds are against life not existing elsewhere in the galaxy. I would say there's probably intelligent life elsewhere in the galaxy. Definitely in the universe, I would say there are other races of life. We have to assume, unless you assume that there is some sort of divine creator, anthropomorphic in nature, that cares about humans but nothing else. Never mind that evolution is also, I say definitely, most people say probably true. If that's true, then that seems to undermine the credibility of the argument humans are unique and special. Ironically, the one argument for us being special that actually does hold up to any sort of scientific scrutiny is, and there was a Kazakh study done, I think a few months ago actually, that talked about this, is the idea that aliens manipulated our genetic code or crossbred, hominids or something like that, and then we became special because they gave us a larger brain. I don't know whether that's true. It's possible. There's the Black Knight satellite stuff. There's the WOW signal. There are all sorts of things that we can't quite explain. And you look throughout human history, and here's where my archaeological standpoint comes in. If you look at petroglyphs and cave paintings and primitive people's writings and so forth, I say primitive, people's writings from ancient times, there seem to be an awfully large number of mentions of things coming out of the sky, discs in the sky, flaming wheels in the sky, beings with wings that fly through the air, things that speak in languages nobody can understand. They look kind of human, but they're not quite human. They have all these powers. They can cause lightning and all these other things. Something inside tells me, and it ties in with the fact that pyramids miraculously appear all around the world before there was intercontinental trade, almost simultaneously in dozens of different cultures. That's always been something, me being interested in having studied archaeology, that I can't quite wrap my mind around without saying either there was intercontinental trade back then and we just don't know it, there's no evidence of it, or there was some sort of interlinking of them by some other group. It's weird that all of these things happen in human evolution. A few thousand years ago, suddenly everybody starts using agriculture. Okay, well, they simultaneously did this all across the world without any interlinking of their cultures at all. That's strange. They start building pyramids. They start building road systems. They start doing all of these things that are hallmarks of this civilized group. We can't even explain how they built them. Nobody has yet explained how the Great Pyramid was built. It's been speculated that it was done by slave labor. Well, they were using stone and copper tools. Do you realize how long it would take us with modern technology to even cut one of the blocks that was used in its construction? And they say, well, the pyramids were used as burial areas. Well, that's true. We found burials in the pyramids. What about the Great Pyramid? There were no bodies. There's no chamber that was apparently meant for a burial. It's been speculated that it could be used as a power generator, in essence. I don't know whether that's true. It's been speculated. But to assume that there's been no I would believe, this is what I choose to believe. I believe that there's life elsewhere in the universe. I think that's 99.9% likely. I would say it's pretty likely that there's intelligent life out there too, possibly within the galaxy. We haven't seen it anywhere in the solar system, but there are other places not too far from the solar system that could, if they had powerful craft, they could travel here, whatever. It would be strange if we assume that there's any grain of curiosity in such a race of people from some other planet or star system or whatever. It would be odd that if they observed that there was life here, that they wouldn't interfere with it. They would perhaps, maybe they're greedy, maybe they want more resources, maybe there's some sort of chemical or mineral or something on the planet that they don't have much of but they need. Maybe they're just naturally curious, maybe they're a race of essentially a bunch of scientists that just want to manipulate genetics. We're not sure. But evidence is quickly mounting because now we've got the technology that we need that our planet's not particularly special in size or composition. There's water elsewhere in the solar system, we know that for certain. It's probably all over the universe. There's water everywhere. They say, well, none of these other planets have water, they can't sustain life. Well, we found it on the moon, we found it on Mars. Io probably is basically all a chunk of ice surrounding this core of rock. It's not that uncommon. It's really, there's nothing special about us unless you drag religion into it. I think religion, more than anything, hinders people, and ironically, if they studied these religions, they would find uncanny similarities between Jewish mythology, Sumerian mythology, which informed Jewish mythology, Babylonian, Egyptian lore, some of the petroglyphs all over the place. All of these different mythologies and religions and spiritual teachings, they all talk about these beings from outer space, or beings from the sky, because they didn't understand that space could be inhabited by intelligent matter. They have these tales. Archaeology can't explain why they exist other than to say, well, they were talking about birds. They were talking about other human groups that they came into contact with that were more advanced than them. Doesn't explain how they came out of the sky, but that's one of the things that they use to explain it. They were talking about asteroids or comets or something. They were talking about, some sort of species of monkey that jumps out of the trees and they thought they could fly. These are not good explanations, and I think in many ways they assume that ancient man was dumb, unable in any way to observe reality without dragging all this mythological nonsense into it. But if we look to people like, we say, well, Greece is a good example of a civilization that got it right. Oh, look at all they build all sorts of cool stuff. They had modern techno, they invented the flamethrower and the gas grenade, for God's sakes. They had all these machines and all this technology, and they invented all these wonderful things. Alexander the Great himself reports about, there was one point at which he was besieging some Indians, and some object, it's not clear what it was, came out of the sky, scared the elephants, put them into a frenzy, and he had to retreat. This is part of Greek record, and they say, well, the Greek culture is different from all those primitive people around the fire, smoking hallucinogens, and it doesn't quite add up. There are too many unexplained things to clearly say, no, there's no life out there. No, we've never been visited before. I think evidence is mounting that there is life out there. It's only a matter of time, in my mind, as we continue to explore the moon and Mars, and possibly further out in the solar system. I think we'll find remnants of life there. It won't be I don't believe there's been intelligent life elsewhere in this particular solar system. I don't think that's happened. I do think, however, they'll find the remains of microbes, possibly life that's above the microbial level. There's no way to know for sure until we test. But if the water's there, the organic molecules are there, there was once, for Mars, there was once an actual atmosphere there, it had all the things that it needed to sustain life. We have to, its a composition actually doesn't seem that much different from Earth. It looks basically like what Earth would look like if it were a little bit smaller, the atmosphere got depleted, and the moon went away. And the moon, and I've heard this, I'm not sure if it's true, but the moon is moving slowly away from the Earth. We're not special. That's the key thing that people need to understand. If you assume that we're special, no, there's probably not life out there unless it's some sort of god race or something. If you assume that this planet, this solar system, and that the human race itself isn't cosmically important, divinely granted special nature, there probably is intelligent life in the universe. May have communicated with us before. We have no way of knowing for sure, but it probably is out there, and there's almost certainly at least unintelligent life elsewhere, probably even within this solar system, probably within this galaxy. I am not a skeptic on these things. I'm skeptical about any individual reports of seeing extraterrestrial life or detecting some sort of signal from an alien race. Those I'm skeptical of. But in the general notion of believing that it's out there, I'm not a skeptic. I do believe that it is somewhere